Welcome to the Chaos Sector. We return to the Matrix. And Taylor just comes out and says it. Yeah, that they were multiple suspects at the home that night. We all know this, but in court, it really puts pressure on the prosecution when you focus on the additional males whose DNA was discovered at the crime scene. Now there is no way that the prosecution can refute this as there was evidence discovered. Not only that, but blood of one of the males was discovered. We've gone over this time and time again, and we'll just keep going over it. There were 3 males' DNA discovered at the crime scene, with blood discovered on a stair rail and on gloves outside in the yard. If you're a detective arriving on the scene and the forensics team notifies you of these discoveries, immediately those males are brought in for questioning, and that questioning will give detectives enough information to determine if those males are the murderers. But as we all know, not only were they not identified in any reports, they obviously were cleared of any possible suspicions. This is by law an unlawful investigation, yet the mainstream media never spoke about it. Yet in the courtroom, it's becoming harder for the prosecution to convince anyone that Koberger was the killer. Interesting enough, the 911 call will be used to support this though, as a lone male was claimed to be there the prior night. Oh really? Let's examine the audio for a moment.
We have reported on the survivor's frantic call to 911. We have parsed the written transcript, and just last night, we were able to fill in some gaps and correct some discrepancies. But tonight, we have the recording itself in full, and I'm going to let you hear it in full. First, I'll just say this. The dead students' housemates, Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk, are joined on the call by 2 neighbors from next door. And at least when the call begins, it seems painfully clear that no one has the slightest idea of how bad the situation inside the house really is. So with that as your...
Okay, that's a nice attempt at suggestive programming, but you still failed, Miss Batfield. How would they not know how bad the situation was when your own network reported that they were texting each other during the attacks? Wasn't this around 4 a.m.? According to those text messages, they never were asleep. So even in the scenario where they weren't involved in the murders, Dylan and Bethany would have went to each bedroom to investigate. And this is approximately 7 to 8 hours prior to the call. In other words, they would know how bad the situation was. This is how the mainstream media protected the real killers if you think about it. Let's continue though.
Preamble. I'm going to go over a lot of the transcript after this call, so just listen and don't worry. I know some of it's really hard to hear, but I will go line by line for a lot of it, but I wanted you to hear it in its entirety so you can make judgments for yourself. Play it.
911 location of your emergency.
Something is happening. Something's happening in our house. We don't know what.
What is the address of the emergency?
1122.
What is the rest of the address?
Oh, Kings Road.
Okay. And is that a house or an apartment?
It's a house.
Can you repeat the address to make sure that I have it right?
Okay, so apparently this would be Dylan speaking to dispatch. But wasn't it Bethany who had actually called? We will deal with that later, but let's address this segment for a moment. Now keep in mind, Dylan is involved, and the emotions that are being heard over the phone seem authentic at first glance. But we all know this hysterical behaviour can't be based on someone appearing to be, quote, unconscious. Let's continue.
To make sure that I have it right?
I'll talk to you guys. We live at the White, so we're next to them.
I need someone to repeat the address for verification.
The address, 1122 King Road.
And what's the phone number that you're calling from?
What's your phone number?
And tell me exactly what's going on.
One of the roommates has passed out, and she was drunk last night and she's not waking up.
Okay.
Oh, and they saw some man in their house last night. Yeah.
And are you with the patient? Okay, I need someone to keep the phone, stop passing it around.
Okay, there are a few things here, as we pointed out, based on the transcript of this call. Dylan tells someone in the background, quote, no, don't, unquote. In the transcript, it's framed in a way that suggests someone didn't want to give the address to dispatch. Here, though, Dylan gives the address, and she is telling someone in the background, don't do something. Now, what would that be exactly? Because we know it's related to the victims. Could it be that Dylan didn't want them to go inside the bedrooms due to the brutal scene? which she had already discovered earlier.
What is the address of the emergency?
1122.
Sounds about right. Yep, it all adds up. Then we have the next door neighbours, a female speaking to dispatch. Now when exactly did they arrive at the home? Because for them to be there, someone notified them about the murders. But what would they do about it, you know? Think about it for a moment. You have Hunter and Emily there, based on the report. Then the next door neighbours were also there, including Dylan and Bethany, who may have been there. This is approximately 5 to 6 people walking around in a home with 4 deceased housemates. That is a tampered crime scene. Yet for the neighbours to be there, in the narrative that the housemates were, quote, unconscious doesn't add up. In fact, there is only one person that they are focusing on, and that was Zana. What about Ethan, who was in the same bedroom? Let's continue.
And tell me exactly what's going on.
One of the roommates has passed out, and she was drunk last night, and she's not waking up.
Okay.
Oh, and they saw some man in their house last night. Yeah.
Now wait a minute, did you catch that? I want you to listen to this portion very carefully. The neighbour is explaining how one of the housemates was drinking the night before, passed out, and was not waking up. In the background, we hear Dylan say, quote, no. And this is when the neighbour states that they saw some man in their house last night. What's the big deal here? Well, first of all, News Nation, for example, added the words we saw in Dylan's statement. But in the audio, we just hear her say no.
One of the roommates has passed out, and she was drunk last night, and she's not waking up.
Okay.
Oh, and they saw some man in their house last night. Yeah.
It is not heard in the 911 call at this point, Dylan stating, quote, no, we saw, unquote. The phrase we saw was added to justify what the neighbour is saying, which brings me to that portion. How could the neighbour explain what Dylan saw last night if, based on the audio, she hasn't provided her with those details? The only way this is possible is that neighbour was notified about all of the details upon arrival, which was prior to this call. She knew the housemates were out partying and drinking and knew of the so-called lone man that was there last night. Meaning, Dylan had talked to her earlier, which also destroys this entire call, because it's being presented as if they are just discovering everything. You understand? For her to obtain all of that information, there was a brief conversation. And since there was a brief conversation, the discovery took place prior to this time frame in the home, you see? Remember, the discovery came first, then the call to the neighbours, then the conversation, then the phone call. Many will overlook this aspect due to the hysterical element of the call. In addition, do you notice how calm that neighbour is? Why is she so calm, yet Dylan is so hysterical? Mind you, the neighbour didn't just arrive and was unaware of the setting in the home. She has to know because she was called to the home due to the setting in the home. So when she was called, you know what, let's keep going before the chaos meter builds any further.
Hi, this is
And are you with the patient? Okay, I need someone to keep the phone, stop passing it around.
Can I just tell you what happened pretty much?
What is going on currently? Is someone passed out right now?
I don't really know, but pretty much at 4 a.m.
Okay, I need to know what's going on right now if someone is passed out. Can you find that out?
Yeah, I'll come. Come on, Bethany, we gotta go check. But we have to.
Now it sounded like Dylan stated, quote, come on Bethany, we gotta go check, unquote.
Okay, I need to know what's going on right now if someone is passed out. Can you find that out?
Yeah, I'll come. Come on, Bethany, we gotta go check. Come on, Bethany, we gotta go check.
The reason the chaos feels that Bethany is not there, and Dylan is making sure she says Bethany's name, is because of the tone and how she said it. It was reported that Bethany called 911, yet she is not heard here nor in the background. Even the next door neighbour grabbed the phone and spoke to dispatch. Who calls 911 and doesn't actually speak to them? It was almost like she's creating a reality that Bethany is there with her, and with that reality being created in Dylan's mind, through the phone call, she literally makes it a reality.
Come on, Bethany, we gotta go check.
Come on, Bethany, we gotta go check. Yeah, as if there aren't 4 other people in the home. Dispatch is talking to Dylan and requested that she go check on the housemaid. Hunter is there, Emily is there, a female neighbour is there, and also another male neighbour. But Dylan feels that Bethany needs to assist her in checking? If Bethany apparently was afraid to speak to dispatch, why would she want to go check on the housemaid? Dylan mentioned her name to physically place Bethany in the home through the phone call.
Come on, Bethany, we gotta go check.
Someone's a bit slick, but not slick enough. You need more WD-40. Bethany didn't call 911, this is why. As we pointed out, they have to pair Bethany with Dylan because it creates a scenario where both of them were linked to the murders as opposed to Dylan. To bring everyone up to speed here, Dylan is involved because her whereabouts were not provided prior to the murders. So we don't know where she was, and Moscow PD kept it a secret for a reason. And that reason is she was linked to the murders. Bethany's whereabouts were provided, and this by default detaches them from each other, which also justifies our belief that Dylan pretended Bethany was there with her, going to check on the victims. You understand? Let's continue.
She's not waking up.
Okay, one moment. I'm getting help started that way.
Okay, thank you.
Now let's stop right here. A male who we assume is Hunter, Ethan's best friend, is checking on Ethan and Xana. Now in News Nation's so-called transcript, it's presented as if they knocked on Xana's door. But how can they be knocking on the door, which means the door was closed? Yet the call was about someone who was unconscious, you see. Some claim that the door was blocked from entering due to Ethan and Xana's bodies slumped on the floor pressed against the door. But the concept still remains, in fact, that makes it even worse. No need to knock on Xana's door when you can physically see them laying on the floor. How would you see them physically laying on the floor, you ask? Isn't this the reason for the 911 call? Due to someone being unconscious? How would you know they were unconscious if you didn't observe it? The heavy breathing is associated with observing something shocking, right? And that would be observing the massacre. Now at this point, even in this bogus call, the setting in the home has everyone aware of the massacre. Yet this is not being described to dispatch. Keep in mind, dispatch's job is to find out what is the status of the people in the home, so they can assess the situation. Which setting do you think is more extreme and cause for more urgent care? Someone who has passed out from drinking the night prior, or someone who is covered in blood and is passed out? They both need medical attention, but one indicates that someone had been violently attacked. Everyone in the home kept this information from dispatch, and you see, it makes the sensationalism of the heavy breathing, the so-called hysterical behaviour of Dylan, all damage control. This was a prime example of it. Also, on a side note, to just magnify the fuckery in this case, in the earlier reports, before this audio was presented, it was claimed that the 911 call was about Dylan, who had passed out. Oh yes, we have the receipts. Let's continue with this nonsense.
Okay, and how old is she?
She's 20.
20, you said?
Yes, 20 here. 20.
Okay.
Hello? Hello?
Okay, I need someone to stop passing the phone around because I've talked to 4 different people.
Okay, sorry, they just gave me the phone.
Is she breathing?
Hello?
Is she breathing?
No.
Okay.
Okay, now see, this is where there should have been a visible description of what is being observed. Remember, the male assumed to be Hunter here is physically observing Xana's body. So when asked if she is breathing, he is observing her deceased body covered in blood. And it isn't just Xana, Ethan is also there. We understand it may be difficult to describe such a gruesome scene, but with 2 victims, one being your alleged best friend and his girlfriend, who was best friends with your girlfriend and Emily, Hunter should have been compelled to just say what was on his heart and his mind. We have to point out that he is not just arriving to the home at this time. The state of shock lasts, on average, from a few minutes to even hours, depending on the type of shocked state one experiences. Since Hunter seems quite coherent while speaking and not flustered, we assume that he is not in a state of shock. So this means he is capable of describing the massacre. Again, he is witnessing this and speaks in a calm and coherent manner. Everyone has overlooked Hunter and Emily, and the chaos hasn't really focused on them. But we must also hold them accountable, because covering up the murders by not notifying dispatch of very thing is no different than the housemates who obstructed justice by not calling hours prior.
To talk to them, Shay. I can't talk to them. They need you to talk to them.
Hello. Okay. I've already sent the ambulance and law enforcement. Stay on the line. If there is a defibrillator available, send someone to get it now and tell me when you have it.
Say that again? There's a police here right now.
Okay. If there's a defibrillator available, send someone to get it now and tell me when you have it.
We don't have one. I think yes. Do you have a defibrillator? Yes, you have one.
Are you talking to the officer?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to let you go since he's there with you and can help you.
Okay.
Now, what I noticed in this entire call was there was only one person who Dylan was focusing on. Hunter went into the room, noticed both Ethan and Xana deceased, covered in blood, tells Dylan to get out of the room, or get away from the door, and basically this how it concluded. If Dylan was awakened by what she assumed was Kaylee upstairs playing with Murphy, and she attempted to call and text Kaylee, and there was no answer, where is the focus on the other victims upstairs? Mind you, in the alleged texting between Dylan and Bethany, Dylan seemed to be focused on Kaylee more so than anyone else. Yet during the discovery, which would be prior to this call, once you realised something was suspicious with Xana and Ethan, surely your prior concerns about Kaylee and Madison would warrant a need to find out what's going on upstairs as well. Where are the next door neighbours during the time frame Hunter discovered Ethan and Xana deceased? Are they upstairs? Did they leave? Surely during this phone call, someone had to have gone upstairs to investigate there as well, because there was also dead silence on the third floor. In addition, the focus on Xana, when clearly Ethan's body was first to be discovered, is odd. Now, of course, there were conflicting reports about where Ethan's body was discovered. One claimed he was near the hallway, just outside of Xana's bedroom, and the other claimed he was discovered in her bed. Ah, yes, the trickery. I see the reason for focusing on Xana here. Well, there are several reasons why, actually. It's physical engagement that's being changed in this setting.
The reason Ethan was essentially a non-factor in defense is because it questions the physical engagement between Ethan and the alleged co-burger in the home. In the physical setting where Ethan was reported to be discovered deceased in Xana's bedroom, it indicates that there was a fatal blow that Ethan suffered that made him a non-factor in putting up any real defense. But this conflicts with Ethan's injuries, which were described as blunt force or sharp force attacks. This would mean there were multiple attacks upon Ethan, so it wasn't one fatal blow that led to Ethan basically being physically incapable of fighting back. That's important because not only would you have Ethan fighting back, but also Xana. One of them is not being attacked while the other is, so how can the prosecution or law enforcement explain Xana putting up a fight, yet Ethan was somehow a non-factor without suffering a fatal blow? Of course, it doesn't make a lick of sense. So the other scenario is there were multiple killers, and well, the victims were outnumbered and were just not able to survive. Creating a scenario where Ethan was discovered deceased in Xana's bed suggests he died shortly after he was stabbed. And that leaves Xana, which her wounds included fingers almost being severed as she put up a fight. Eliminating Ethan from being a physical defense justifies the quote, lone killer narrative you see. But everyone knows this is not how it unfolded. Now let me go back to a portion of audio, because I think there is something that needs to be deciphered. Someone was whispering something while everyone was checking on the victims. Let's listen closely. There are different people on the call during this time frame, although dispatch told them to stop passing the phone around. The whispering is a female, not a male, but the heavy breathing prior was a male. Listening closely, the whispering has a SH sound like show or showing. This whispering indicates that there is something that is being kept discreet. It could also be, quote, show them to me, unquote. Now, of course, we already know they had discovered those housemates deceased prior to this call, but what is this female whispering? Whispering is always a sign of being secretive, so whispering about the victims in the home being checked upon, well, we have to conclude that the female either suspects those housemates are dead or wants to confirm that they are dead. Then there is another female that says, quote, don't, and then this is when the male says, get out. One would listen to this audio and think that the male has discovered a bloody massacre in Zana's bedroom and is preventing Dylan from seeing it, right? But since we know she already knew the housemates were murdered, then Dylan's and that male's reaction is not actually fear, rather a confirmation. But to make it appear that she is in a state of shock, Dylan simply pretended to be scared and hysterical on the phone call. And, I would present the possibility that Bethany was in on this specific strategy. Although we've detached the two, Bethany is not free from guilt. Bethany calls 911, but Dylan perhaps is better at manipulation, so she pretended to be hysterical in the call. In retrospect, it would make her appear innocent, truly devastated that her housemates were murdered. But you see, there are too many holes in this narrative. Like the texting and calls throughout the night soon after the murders. From 4 a.m. up until 12 p.m., Dylan and Bethany were wide awake, and Dylan was running around on social media. If there wasn't any indication there was danger, then they would have went back to sleep, right? Of course, wait, what am I talking about? They did go back to sleep, right? At least, that's what the earlier reports claimed. And you see, it's a catch-22 for the prosecution, because with every unsealing, it just contradicts the earlier reports in the investigation.
Yep, she can't be shocked, because the actual phone call is contradicting that shock and hysteria. Following the setting, based on the texting and phone calls, they were already investigating those bedrooms earlier Sunday morning, approximately around the 4 a.m. to 5 a.m. timeframe. Once they knocked on each door, after there was no response via texting and phone calls, next is to physically see why is it so creepy in the home. And there you have it. Now, as for the unconscious claim, this also destroys the narrative this phone call tries to push. If Bethany called 911, this was about the housemates who were not responding to text or calls. Then investigate the creepy vibes in the home, discovering their housemates, quote, unconscious. And approximately 7 to 8 hours passed before that call. They call over neighbors, who also were aware of the murders prior that night. And what we conclude is they assisted in clearing up some key evidence, perhaps drugs being dumped. Yet, because they are technically witnesses, the real killers have to make sure they won't snitch. We all observed the photo of Moscow PD visiting that home with those neighbors being questioned. Now, after hearing this audio where the neighbor was there and had spoken to dispatch, it really puts that photo into perspective. The female who was standing outside on the porch, appearing nervous, we can assume she was the one who was at the home. Her nervous behavior aligns with what she observed in the home, and it wasn't a female passed out from drinking the prior night. We even viewed the mainstream media's report on the home regarding the alleged audio from that home that was so-called debunked. In addition, it was also reported that some of those next-door neighbors moved out the very next day. But one thing that was never reported was that those neighbors were at the home and had talked to dispatch during the discovery. Again, as we mentioned, everything that's being unsealed now as a form of damage control is only exposing the conflicting claims previous in the investigation. Every sealed document from years prior is now being unsealed, which is only destroying everything stated prior. Hunter and Emily get there, we assume in the early hours Sunday, and they all brainstorm how to make something make sense when they do decide to call. And the plot was to call, creating a setting where they're not sure what condition the victims were in until, quote, checking on them. Again, why were they only focused on Zana? It would be different if only Dylan and Zana were in the home, and Dylan was concerned about Zana. There were multiple people in the home during this call, so were they all focused on Zana's bedroom? Impossible, because none of the victims were responsive prior during the attempts to communicate with them. So naturally, once you notice Zana wasn't responsive, then you also conclude that Ethan wasn't neither. And then Kaylee and Madison weren't responsive. Someone or a group had to go upstairs to find out if those housemates were, quote, unconscious. I think the reason they only focused on Zana is because if the call was about multiple housemates discovered unconscious, then this obviously indicates they were attacked. What are the chances that 4 people were passed out, you see? So, focusing on one victim from the dispatcher's point of view, then there's only one housemate to evaluate. But if there were 4 victims, the dispatch would naturally assume they may have been attacked. And of course, they would have to describe the same physical condition of 4 housemates, claiming to all be unconscious due to drinking the night before. The chances of that are 1 in 5.7 octatrillion. And you see, this makes the call a farce, pretending to be hysterical in real time, when everything was previously plotted out for that call. It's possible that Zana was actually the last one to be murdered, or better yet, still had a pulse after the massacre, meaning she was the last one still breathing until her demise. Being the last victim, based on still being alive after the attacks, psychologically, everyone will focus on Zana, glued to her body, making sure she had finally perished. And that would align with being fixated on not only her in particular in the 911 call, but also just that location in the home. That would also explain the fake DoorDash delivery, coming back to make sure Zana was deceased. Dylan was on the 2nd floor, sure, so it's fitting that the housemates on the same floor will be a focus in the so-called discovery. But keep in mind, about 7 to 8 hours had passed, so if there will be a call, it would be depicted as my housemates seem to be unconscious. Dispatch would then ask a series of questions, such as where are they located, how many housemates are unconscious, and do those housemates have pulses? The point is that this creates more urgency and concern from the dispatcher, as it indicates that there may have been harm done to the housemates. With only one housemate being focused on, with all due respect, the dispatch is more calm and may assume it is in fact just a case of a college student who had been drinking too much. You see, it's the setting in the home that was manipulated that created the narrative that Dylan and Bethany were not aware their housemates were murdered. The call doesn't mention anything about blood splattered on the floor, on the doors, heck, on the stair rail. Absolutely no indication they were murdered. It was depicted this way in the affidavit, it was depicted this way in previous articles, and you heard it for yourself now, with the 911 call. If blood was mentioned in the call, dispatch assumes there was a physical attack, asks if the victim is breathing, Dylan, or whoever would be on the line, respond no, she's not. Dispatch assumes they're possibly deceased. Changes the setting in the home, also would reveal that Dylan was aware that her housemates were murdered, which conflicts with the affidavit, which destroys literally everything she claimed unfolded that night. Keep in mind, when Hunter told Dylan to get out, this is when he discovered Ethan and Zana deceased, based on the setting during the call. But this was already discovered by literally everyone who was in that home, including the next door neighbors. Again, those neighbors were called to the home for a reason. With all of the circle of friends those housemates had, being Hunter, Emily, and others within that circle, they called the next door neighbors over as well. With so many people there, obviously there are more victims to be concerned about than just Diana. You have Dylan, possibly Bethany, Hunter, Emily, a female neighbor, and it could have been more as well. Bad news travels fast, my friends, and with so many people there, it increases the chances that bad news reached the outer circle of peers. Remember, according to an anonymous male college student who was interviewed, that bad news got out approximately around 8 a.m. Sunday morning. Yet, how can there be bad news being relayed at 8 a.m. if the 911 call is creating a setting where it's just Ziana passed out from drinking? That is not a minor issue, but it's not uncommon for college students to be passed out from drinking. The point here, the bad news was about housemates discovered deceased. And this news spread early Sunday morning. Katie, Kaylee's friend, had attempted to contact Kaylee around 10 a.m. to see if she was okay, remember? For her to attempt this contact, she would have been notified that Katie was harmed in some manner. And of course, that's not what she was told, my friends. What about WSU Kim's claim that the housemates knew who were in the home during the attacks? Although she's full of it, we can all agree that at the very least, they were aware of the attacks. We can't clarify if they knew the killers. That's something apparently WSU Kim knew, mysteriously. How would she know that Dylan and Bethany knew the individuals in the home? Well, because someone from the home knew and told her fellow Pi Phi sisters. And that would be Bethany. You see, this is why we stick to the core of the investigation. Because everything that was stated prior, is coming back to bite the prosecution in the ass. I'm done.
Something tells me that Bethany wasn't there, and Dylan pretended she was there. We know Hunter and Emily was there. We know the next door neighbors were there, a female and a male. So that's 2 males and 2 females with Dylan. In total, that's 5 people in the home. With Dylan saying, quote, "Come on, Bethany, we gotta go check," it seems a bit off to me. If we were to include Bethany, she was the one who made the call, yet she isn't speaking to dispatch. Then why would she call then? Why didn't Dylan call, who seems to not have a problem speaking to dispatch? In the text message transcripts, it stated that Bethany called 911 around 11:58. Then she hands the phone to Dylan. That doesn't add up. We would assume that Dylan is preoccupied with something, and Bethany calls 911. Yet she decides to let Dylan speak to dispatch. It's possible, but considering the elements in this case, I believe Bethany had left the home some time prior. Let's go over a few things that justify this belief. For one, there is a division between Bethany and Dylan, based on police reports. Bethany's whereabouts were provided, Dylan's weren't. That's one key difference. Second, Bethany's accounts from that night do not obtain any vital information linked to the murders, while Dylan's accounts are reported to provide key details about the setting in the home. Third, Bethany is alleged to have exculpatory evidence, which would exonerate Kohberger, contradicting the lone killer narrative that is supported by Dylan's description of a male observed in the home. Now, although many will shun Dot, the claims were from an actual neighbor in the home on King Road, who claimed to have witnessed Dylan, Bonnie, Clyde, and 2 other males standing on the porch that morning. This could be considered speculation, but the explanation Dot gave after being shunned did give them a benefit of the doubt. They humbly acknowledged their wrongdoings and explained why they provided that account from the night of the murders and later Sunday morning. We examined that live stream with Dot and Melissa Jade and came to the conclusion that Dot had been exposed, of course, but at least had the dignity to accept it and explain why they did what they did. We focused more on the accounts, which Dot claimed was from a female neighbor who feared speaking out publicly. As an investigator, we focus on the information, not the person providing it. If that information is logical, supporting evidence, or is a very likely scenario, it's worth implementing that information into our investigative work. The point here, there is more suspicious activity and connections with Dylan than Bethany. In close to 3 years now, there hasn't been much surrounding Bethany's name, other than potentially being involved in drug dealing. Now, this does link her to Bonnie and Clyde, if it were true. Yet, there hasn't been a claim that Bethany was seen hanging with Bonnie and Clyde on the porch that Sunday morning, you see. That would be Dylan. I say all of that to say this. Bethany left the home, and Dylan was there by herself for some time, and she had called several people to come over, including the next door neighbors you see. Makes sense that one housemate left alone would call over next door neighbors, instead of 2 housemates there. Mind you, news had spread all the way to WSU, and we conclude it was Bethany who had relayed this news, and soon after she left the home. Her exculpatory evidence conflicts with the setting of still being there during the phone calls, because if she has the exculpatory evidence, which is based on confirming there were other suspects, it's likely she would leave due to the fear of being threatened, or after being threatened, she got the hell out of town. Dylan, though, is linked to the murders, so she can't, I repeat, she can't leave the home because of her involvement. She has to help cover it up because she's involved. And this is why Dylan would pretend Bethany was physically there with her on the call, to make it appear she wasn't the only surviving housemate at the home. Now there are other females in the background there, being the female neighbor and Emily there with Hunter. Coincidentally, as we pointed in our investigation, Emily does favor Bethany a bit. It's not a strong resemblance, but hairstyles and color, one could be convinced one was the other in surveillance footage. Also, it is alleged that Emily had been a resident there a year prior to the murders. And Emily was not only best friends with Zana, but was also friends with, guess who, Dylan. Yep, we have to confirm this with a photo. Here we see Emily with Dylan from some time ago. Now, if Dylan was friends with Emily, who was best friends with Xana, Dylan would call Emily. Emily then tells Hunter, and they both come to the home. Now, there isn't any connection with Bethany. She may have been associated with them, but not friends with Hunter and Emily. What we're establishing is a significant distinction between Bethany and Dylan, and who they were associated with. Bethany called her Pi Phi sisters, and that information reached WSU. Dylan called Emily and Hunter. Based on the communication and who both are associated with, it appears Bethany had left the home after relaying the information to her Pi Phi sisters. In fact, it's likely that her sisters insisted that she get out of the home, you see. The Pi Phi sisters tell her to leave to ensure her safety, and before the cops get there. Bethany then leaves, perhaps stays at a sister's dorm for the night, then heads back to Nevada sometime afterwards. I don't think her sorority sisters would want Bethany to stick around in a home full of deceased housemates. Dylan, on the other hand, has a different association, which prevents her from leaving. Again, her whereabouts not being confirmed prior to the murders creates suspicion. And since law enforcement didn't provide the specifics of her whereabouts, like all other housemates, it is obvious they protected Dylan. And when you put all the pieces together, as the DoorDash driver was never identified, never interviewed, but was speculated to be a female with dark hair, well, this would be Bonnie. And these two individuals are connected due to law enforcement concealing the whereabouts of a housemate, an identity of a DoorDash driver. So in conclusion, the phone call was staged to give Dylan face, and to also make it appear Bethany was there with her. Considering the mischievous nature of Dylan, based on our examination, it's not irrational to suggest she pretended Bethany was with her during that call. And remember, Dylan was friends with the very people in the home, being Emily and Hunter. None of them seemed to be close friends with Bethany, though. We suggested that Bethany wasn't too fond of Dylan, and definitely didn't seem too fond of her as a Pi Phi sister neither. So Bethany may have quickly got out of there, knowing the type of person Dylan was. Moscow PD and the prosecution know Bethany has exculpatory evidence, and they have to pair them together by any means necessary. If Bethany takes the stand, don't be surprised if she states that she had left the home and can provide evidence of it. That would leave only one person at the home. After all, it's her affidavit that has been used, right? As pointed out, that affidavit will be contradicted in court, just like everything that's being unsealed. You can keep running from the truth, but you can't hide from it. This is the chaos sector.